2, 3.
Welcome, Cosmic Explorers, to the Human Design and Astro Club podcast, your celestial compass to self-discovery and personal empowerment. We are going to take you on a cosmic journey where we dive deep into the fascinating realms of human design, astrology, and tarot, where we will unravel the cosmic codes that shape your personalities, relationships, and destinies. Welcome to the club. Welcome to the Human Design and Astro Club podcast. And this is an interview episode. So hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is going to be a really fantastic episode because I have been waiting for the right reflector to come on. And so this is the first time we're going to have a reflector on. We've had every other type on at this point. I really am very, very picky about people that I pick to be on the podcast, I feel like at this point. And so if you don't know who I am, my name's Krystle. I'm a 1-3 sacral generator. I am a rising Capricorn, a Sagittarius sun, and an Aries moon. I have been in my experiment now for 7 years. Before that, I used to do hair and makeup professionally. And then I also accidentally worked at the Kabbalah Center for 3.5 years. And that's kind of where I started my path of human design, because it would be shortly after that I bumped into human design. And so I've been doing this, I guess we could call this professionally, for over 3 years now. And I've read, I don't know how many charts, thousands of charts at this point. And it's been an experience and an experiment, and I'm excited to kind of go through this experience together. So let me introduce right now, and he'll do proper introductions, Reiki Marco, and thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. My 51st gate loves that I'm the first reflector on your podcast.
Also
So
in the
that's
nodes right
okay.
now. So that makes
What's that?
it's in the nodes right now. So I feel like even more like reflector energy. And you bridge one of my splits.
Yep, indeed. I was just thinking of that. Wonderful.
Oh, I'm more
Well,
excited now.
yeah, my full name is Marco Muehlbach. I was born and raised in San Diego. I'm 30 years old. My birthday's on the 9th, and I'm a 3-5 reflector on the cross of rulership.
Mm.
And I've been in my experiment for about 10 years now. And I would say human design came to me really late in my kind of conscious awakening. I dropped out of college because of mushrooms, basically. I did mushrooms and
Wow.
had my like whole world blown apart.
Wow.
And that was in 2012. And I was first introduced to Reiki by my mother. And I was like calling her on the phone, crying, like, Mom, I need to get out of here. And she's like, Oh, do you want to do Reiki? And I was like, I can't do any more mushrooms, Mom. Like, it's really a strange sensation. She goes, No, it's not mushrooms. And so I went and received Reiki, and that was my introduction to spirituality. And for those people that don't know Reiki, it's
Hmm.
Japanese in origin, and it's basically a relaxation therapy where you do something very similar to human design. Is you harmonize with your nature, and our nature, as above, so below, as within, so without. And so to harmonize with the internal Reiki with the external Reiki is one by which we can achieve a state called Anshinritsume, which essentially is one where the universe can do us no harm. And if it seems like it, it's actually doing us a favor. And it's cultivated through a peaceful mind, essentially. And it's a very, very, how do you say, refreshing and relaxing experience. You just lay down, the practitioner
Mhm.
will like move their hands over you. There's usually no touching involved. Some people will touch, and traditionally in Reiki, they would do touching and light pressing, but it's not massage, and
Mhm.
it works on the energy bodies. And for me, having kind of had my cherry popped or my dark night of the soul in college, it was such a smooth transition from Reiki into sound healing, into, excuse me, men's work, working with big containers of men, and then eventually into human design. And it
Mm.
all kind of happened pretty quickly. But human design has been such a huge obsession for me, primarily because I was introduced to it a decade ago but I was reintroduced to it by emotional manifester who
Mm.
was a biomechanics specialist.
Mm.
He was born with
Wow.
scoliosis, and he fixed his scoliosis purely with functional training. So training, walking, running, and throwing. And he was raised by a reflector. And so
Mm.
when we met, we were
Wow.
already like boys. But then he was like, "Are you a manifester?" And I was like, "No." And he goes, "You're a reflector." And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Whoa." So it was like meeting his mom in a way. And he was the first person not only to show me biomechanics, but really to show me what an emotional man gen could be. I mean, this dude had insane root pressure. Like he said he's leaving in 10 minutes. He's in the car leaving 5 minutes. He's backing out of the driveway and I'm like having to run to catch up to him.
Yeah.
Um, his emotional wave was so strong and he knew exactly what to do. One time he was driving himself, he was about to get in the car to go to the theater, and I could tell he was in a wave. I said, "Hey, bro, can I come to the theater with you?" He's like, "Man, I love that you would even offer that, but your energy is way too precious. I'm just gonna go ride this out in the theater and then I'll come back and we can jam on some stuff." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So it was the first time that I feel like I was actually treated as a reflector, and that was
Mm.
about years ago. And at the
Wow.
same time, I'm learning biomechanics. And so I've been a martial artist my whole life. So had a lot of like the contralateral movement and the elements of it. But it all just kind of felt like one of those stars aligning moment. We got the opportunity to live together and we did a bunch of cool stuff. He's now on one of his, 1-3 experiments in Thailand, training people how to do kickboxing and functional patterns and smell their gut biome with
Wow.
mewing. And he's like a mad scientist. He's one of my inspirations.
I also
Uh,
consider myself to be a mad scientist as well.
yeah,
I have an intensive that I run for the variables, and I call everybody a mad scientist.
I love it. That's what
Yeah.
he calls his thing. He calls them intensives. That's so funny.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm also kitchen's environment, so I felt like it kind of
So
worked. I like to try to speak, like use my design intentionally, and I feel like that's kind of
Mhm.
the whole point.
Right.
So and it resonates. You know what I mean? Like when I call other people mad scientists and we're in this experiment, it feels very third line to me. And I am mostly a third line, third color. Three parts third color and one fourth, which feels like the oddball, but that's like my way in. So I find that to be really interesting. So I want to start because not a lot of people know about reflectors. Obviously, you know that. That's like one of the biggest things. Even Raw talks about that there's just not that much information about reflectors. What would you say is the first place you would start if you were a reflector? And we'll kind of like just like go with the flow with the conversation as an open throat. I try not to have like too much things prepared because it's just better if I'm in flow.
Right on. In terms of like starting with the reflector, one of the things that I was really helpful for me was to look at my family's types and
Mm-hmm.
their strategies and whatnot, because naturally I was like, okay, I got this moon cycle thing, and okay, but what's like tangible? And especially as a man, I feel like I'm very much so looking for the tangible, implementable, trackable things. And so one of the first things that I did when I learned about human design was I ran all my family's charts. And my mom
Mm-hmm.
is an emotional projector. My dad and my brother are both emotional manifesting generators. And I had always had this idea about myself that I was like really emotional, especially being a Pisces. And it's not that that's not true, but as I've learned more, and especially in the beginning, I realized, oh my God, me being like the glue of my family is because I'm onboarding so much emotional energy and so
Mm-hmm.
much emotional awareness. And naturally, I can't really do anything with anybody else's emotions other than just like kind of witness it,
Mm-hmm.
and pray for them and love up on them anyways. And so for me, as a reflector looking for help and guidance, it was so much about really coming to terms with where I was actually at. So my emotions, I realized, were actually just like absorbed from
Yeah.
my family, my brother, my dad, and my mother. and they all express their emotions so very differently. And
Hmm.
so that became one of my excitements about human design, was actually being able to kind of track how well my family members were implementing their strategy and authority,
Oh.
and they were not doing it well at all. So much like open talking head.
The reflector just sampling
It was
everyone's
nuts.
solar plexus.
It was nuts. And I always thought of myself as like really a really emotional person, especially being a Pisces.
Yeah.
And now I realize, like, when I'm on my own, I'm really cruising. I'm not super emotional. Um, but it's so hard for me to it's like it's totally in my nature to absorb people's emotions.
Yeah.
And now I have a variety of techniques. Like, I have a special breathing technique that I use when I'm around people that are in really heavily emotionally charged states, which I kind of developed in doing my work with Sacred Sons and some of the brothers, because we would have these men come to us with like 3 or 4 decades of repressed emotion and repressed anger and sadness. And we would be there witnessing, and also, like, holding them and allowing them to physically move through some of their anger and some of their grief. And so I found myself naturally wanting to lay down a lot. And I
Mm,
was like, how do
mm,
I, like, how do I get around this? And one of the techniques that I kind of developed was like and it's already a breathing technique. I mean, everyone has already breathed in probably the infinite ways that we can breathe. Someone has used every style of breath work. But for me, something that really works, and I'd love to hear some feedback on reflectors, or even just in general, this concept around like sealing the aura, right? Which is
mm,
something that the reflector aura can do, seal and open up.
mm-hmm.
Uh, but the breathing is really simple. It's a reverse belly breathing. So normally when we breathe in, air goes in through our nose and our belly fills up, our belly expands. And when we exhale, the belly contracts. That's the natural breathing, right? Relax, not thinking about it. What I started doing was doing the opposite. So when I breathe in, I also suck my belly in. And then when I breathe out, I push my belly out.
Mm.
It's reversing the normal breathing pattern. And what I find is that grounds me more in my physical body, to the point where, like, I'm inhabiting so much of my physical flesh that a lot less stuff tends to get stuck and carry with me. That's
It
like
makes
one of the
sense with being, smell being a first tone. And
Mhm.
it's like it's what grounds you. It's like the underbelly of everything, and it puts you back into self. So what is your cognition?
I believe it's feeling,
Hmm. Fifth tone?
touch.
So okay, so
Touch.
your touch, okay, so sixth tone.
Yeah.
Okay. Hmm. Yeah, the opposite ends. My tonal resonance in my body is touch. So it's
Mm,
like I always noticed that when I would do like either do like breathing exercises, or when I felt like out of my body, I would
hmm.
pick up like a crystal or something, or I would hold my hand. Sometimes when I was younger, I used to hold my hand.
Yeah.
And I realized like that's me coming back to the body through touch. And then the smell. I usually, and like I try to incorporate both of them now, where I'm like holding a crystal, or I'm touching something, or rubbing, and then breathing at the same time. And that's how I regulate my nervous system at this point.
Beautiful. Well, you'll have to try this reverse belly
Yeah.
breath
I
and
was
let
like,
me know how that goes.
I dug that. I was like, okay. And I see that as like almost like a disruptor. It
Yeah,
like it disrupts the pattern that's like almost being like held, and it kind of recirculates the energy and puts you
totally,
back into self.
totally. Yeah, and I notice myself actually switching to that breathing mode, and sometimes I'll catch myself in that breathing mode and realize, like, oh, my body kind of has this awareness that, like, seal the aura up, while my mind kind of is just being like flowy and wanting to play.
Hmm.
um, the body will sometimes kind of get a little bit more protective. And so yeah, with the touch element too, I learned a technique called dry bathing, or Kenyoku in Reiki. and it's very similar, but they use it as a like a cleansing technique. Basically, what you do, you inhale one hand up,
Mhm.
you swipe down the arm, inhale the other hand up, and then you do the insides, and then you do across the body. And what I realized was that for me, it's so much less about getting other people's stuff off of me and so much more about coming into contact with like, oh, this is my skin. That's me
Mm,
touching myself.
mm,
And so, I'm big into, again, like practicality and embodiment. One of the reasons why I loved human design so much, because it put language to something that I was already studying with Reiki and men's work and sound healing. Now there's not only a language, but also a bunch of other people who have been running their own individual experiments. And so I'm legitimately just in a whole buffet. It's very exciting.
yeah, I totally feel that. And I also do Reiki. I feel like I'm not as deep as you are in, but I also do Reiki, and I feel like since doing I got certified after finding human design, and
Mhm,
I feel like there's some sort of it's almost like I feel like there's some sort of system I'm kind of developing between Reiki, human design, and I'm also getting into somatics now.
mhm.
And I feel like the centers speak to us. I don't know if that's something that you've come across yourself, or I don't know, maybe it's my 43.
I no 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 I'm picking up what you're saying. I mean I have 43 as well, so maybe it's our
Oh,
43. Uh, but
auditory.
yeah, well, it's for me what that is like, how do we take this mental framework and, ultimately like turn it into a science,
Hmm.
one that we can start to deprogram or, look at and, reassess genetic trauma essentially, and also, in our lifetime trauma,
Hmm.
because obviously they spent so much time doping people up with pills and psychoanalyzing people that, to me, if human design were to become something like an abomination, it would just revive, how you say, psychoanalysis. And that's not the direction that I wanted to take it. And one of the reasons why I never gravitated towards the Jovian Archive or the International Human Design School was because, I didn't want really any ideas put in my head that
Mm,
I would just believe them. I
yeah,
wanted to I wanted to what are the building blocks? It's like when I would get Legos as a kid, I would throw the directions away and I would just look at the
that's the
picture of,
every third line. Every third line is like I don't even directions don't exist. Just
here
like
are these directions.
just chuck them.
Exactly. Useless. Like, what's the point? So yeah, so for me, and I'm a 3-5, right? So I consider myself and I call myself often a heretic, a human design heretic, because there's
Hmm.
so many things, and I've heard Ra even as well say, like, the system's incomplete. It's, it has to mature and it has to
It's
evolve. And
mutating.
one of my excitements is like, oh, what mutation do I bring to it? And one of the
Mm. Oh, that's a great
scarcity,
question.
right? One of the scarcity things I've come up against is, that everybody wants to bring their thing to it. What's exciting about that though, and the scarcity comes from like, oh, but I'm going to bring my thing to it, and mine is somatic and Reiki. But the
Mm.
beautiful part about it is that, the people that resonate with me will come into this under more embodied human design through evolve. People that resonate with you will come through your system, and it's ultimately a collaborative effort. The
Hmm.
competition is there as maybe a spark, but the thing that sustains it is realizing like, oh, you have your tribe, I have my tribe, and we're all part of a collective. But I'm going to take care of my tribe, you're going to take care of your tribe, and
Right.
to be further differentiated. Like, one of the things about like COVID that I was really excited to see was how much people stopped, how you say, subscribing to the external authority, because
Mm.
of how like ridiculous some of the antics that were happening there. So many people were just like, I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah, it really made you well, I mean, it was literally the beginning stage of the 7-year mutation that we're currently going through.
Mhm.
Which as a 1-3, I did a huge deep dive in 2017. on 2027. And I said to myself, I don't know, I'd be curious to get your reflector take on this because you're
Yeah.
like in the environment, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But I was like, okay, so we're supposed to kick off with this mutation where like we're gonna have to slow down. I was like, we're gonna have to slow down. It's supposed to start at like somewhere around 2020. Okay. I was like, I'm not quite sure when this is gonna be, but I'm like, okay, we have to slow down in order for this shift to take. How is that going to happen? I'm like, I was like just up here. My open head was just like spinning. And my first line's like, okay, I have to figure out how this is going to happen. And then
Hmm.
the day the world shut down, I was like, it started.
Yeah.
That's actually when right around that time I used to do hair and makeup professionally for 13 years. And I had been studying human design for a while during that period of time, and I had been, doing readings for people locally. And I had no concept of ever bringing this to anybody else.
Hmm.
But in that moment, I'm desire motivation. In that moment that the world shut down, I heard a little
Hmm.
voice that said, it's time. And I was like,
Mm.
time for fucking what? And they told me I had to go online. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, like when your body starts to like really take over, I'm sure that you experience this, especially with being a reflector, and
Hmm.
like where the mind no longer is running the roost.
Oh
And
yeah.
the mind's like, but you've been doing this over here for this long. Why would you give up, a good thing, whatever that is? And my body's like, we're done with that. I'm a third line body. I'm like, we've cut that off. And I'm just like, this is crazy. But I just did everything step by step as a
Hmm.
generator. I didn't try to run with the baton like a million steps ahead. I'm like, everything has just been the next step, the next step. And I kind of just came online with no intention of I had no idea what I was going to do. I just literally started sharing human design,
Hmm.
and then people are like, oh, she knows something. And so then I was like, oh, I guess I do. And then I started offering readings. And then I did a free reading every month just to continue the repetition as a generator
Hmm.
and the practice and figure out my system and mastery. And then before I knew it, I created some sort of business. And I was just like, here we are. I like, like I feel like a lot of people jumped in with human design. Oh, I see it as a profit, or I see how I can put it in my coaching, or I see how I had zero intention of anything actually working out. I went on with the desire to lead people back to themselves. I'm a
Mm.
vessel of love.
Mm.
And so that was my only desire. And everything else was just like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I still don't know what I'm doing. But I've managed to figure out some sort of success because I'm still doing it and things are growing. So I'm like, okay, we're doing something right. I mean, you probably can relate to that as a third line.
Oh, big time. I mean, my call into sharing human design online was to preface it, I had watched Reiki blow up. I had watched sound healing and men's work blow up. And I never really had any desire to like be in a state of rulership, which is funny, my cross is rulership. But I never wanted to be like that guy. And then I found out unexpectedly I was going to have a child with my partner. And so that was the thing where it's like, all right, Marco, you're like a traveling musician, you host retreats around the world, and now you're about to have a baby.
Mm,
Are you gonna still do that? And I was like, dude, that takes so much energy. I gotta
yeah.
find something else. And so it evolved into me just going on it was TikTok actually. I didn't
Mm.
want to go to TikTok. I had an Instagram with like 10,000 followers just from the years of before. But I was like, I'm just gonna give this TikTok thing a try. And I liked their interface for editing a lot better than
It was
Instagram.
better. Hmm.
So much better. Which it's doing some weird stuff now, but I
I
digress.
just can't do TikTok. Like we put our podcast, people probably have no idea that we do that. We put our podcast on there with no strategy. I'm just like, if somebody sees it, that's where I'm at with TikTok.
Yeah.
It moves too fast for me.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel as a reflector, and a lot of people think everything's generator, and I'm like, I mean, not that is true and not necessarily true. I kind of look at a lot of these social media apps very like emotional. There's a
Yeah,
lot of,
completely. Well,
and
it's all
so,
not self too, really.
well, that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it wants to keep you on there, and I'm right body. That's my only right variable. And I do not want to feel like I have to be constantly active. If I have to be constantly active, then you've lost me. And so that's how I felt about TikTok. You had to be super active on there, and I'm just like, I'll pass.
Yeah. It's so for me it was finding a way to authentically share where I could channel my inspiration and it didn't feel like I was having to force anything.
Yeah.
You know, like I wasn't an everyday, I didn't get 10,000 followers on Instagram by like posting every day. I would just, when I really felt it, I would throw it in there. And having a kid on the way, I was like, I actually have to start working with people and build up a business. But it was mostly just like, I want to help enough people to the point where I can like sustain my family and not have to go to work 8 hours a day and not be around for my, daughter's first
Right.
steps, etc. Which is funny enough, I'm a reflector, my partner is a projector, and our daughter is a manifestor. It's like the
Oh, I
worst
have a
start
little
to a terrible
manifestor
human
too.
design joke. You have one too?
I have
Amazing.
I have an ego manifestor.
Uh,
Uh,
I got an emo manifestor.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's
But to answer your question about TikTok, though, it was like I was like, okay, so how do because I felt the same way as you. I'm like, I'm not like, I don't really move that fast. Like,
yeah.
my, high twitch or fast twitch muscles are really how you say dialed in because of all my martial arts and stuff. But in terms of like social media, Instagram even moves too fast for
It
me.
does. Yeah.
So what I did was I just posted the same piece of content. I made the same piece of content for 28 days. I started with the strategies, then I did the authorities, then I did the profiles, then I did digestion and environment. And if you go back far enough on my TikTok, you'll see it's just like 28 days in a row of Marco saying, you know,
I like 28
you're a
days.
generator, this is your strategy. If you're a projector, this is your strategy. And I had to find creative ways to say it, but I saw
Right.
it as an opportunity to strengthen and diversify my throat, which later on I met a brother who goes by the name of Prana, but his
Hmm.
dad was a part of the first cohort with Ra. So he was like learning about human design in like middle school, high school.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and he was looking at my chart and he goes, man, you're like the most manifestor reflector I've ever seen. I have a bunch of gates in my throat and a lot of gates pointing up towards
Mm.
the throat. And he's like, it's probably why you're so good at TikTok. And I was like, can reflectors be subtype like that? And he goes, well, it's more likely that your throat is going to turn on because it has so many connections already,
Well, yeah.
built into it. So in a way, yeah. He's like, is that a drain on you at all? And I'm like, not when I'm doing it often.
Mm.
Like my thing actually is when I kind of like how you say fall off the go-kart for a little bit, I tend to catastrophize it, even though I don't
Mm.
have 36.
Well,
I'll
I
catastrophize
think
it.
that's the third line mind. My brother's a
Yeah,
3-5, and I watch you guys battle it out in your mind
yeah,
with like things that can or may not exist, but
yeah,
there's always kind of a third line battle happening up there.
yeah.
And I find it very amusing as a third line.
I'm glad you find it amusing. My partner does not find it amusing. She's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Baby, I'm just moving through my stuff.
Hmm.
Please don't let me affect you." And she's like,
I get that.
"But you do affect me, and I love you, and you deserve better. And no one should be talking shit about what you're doing because you're doing amazing stuff." I'm
Oh,
like, "I love you so much.
projectors.
Let
Projectors
me be in it. Let me
projectors
be in my
always
guilt
have our
energy."
back.
Yeah, right, right. Or they're talking shit behind our backs. Uh, be mindful because and that's one of actually I'd love to get your feedback or your response on this is like the difference between frustration and bitterness.
Mm. Hello there, Krystle here. And I wanted to stop you for just a moment and interrupt this episode and let you know about a few opportunities that we have outside of this podcast and YouTube channel. So, we do have a bunch of classes, courses, workshops, we do all the things. And I want to let you know first about a few free classes that we have, like our crash course on understanding the transits and planets, and also our tips and tricks to understanding your strategy and authority. And then we also have our fractal family framework sample. Now, we also have, if you're at the beginning of your human design journey or you just want more information, our user manual to your true self, which explains all of the language of human design because it is quite dense. And I also do readings outside of this episode. You can also send me a DM on Journey Through HD waitlist, and I will get you on my list and send you an email for when I do have openings for my readings. We also have an affirmations guide for your open and undefined centers. And then what's coming up in May is our color code variable intensive, a 5-week journey through the 4 radical transformations that are also called the variables. And we help give practical and tangible information to apply this to your everyday life. And you get a lot of classes on this. Every week we do a live class, and there's also self-paced classes over in the lab and an opportunity to experiment. That's one of our biggest takeaways of our color code variable intensive is the experimentation. So you can check out all of this information down below in the description, and we hope to see you in May. And now back to this episode.
One of my observations is like frustration is really, really hard to hide. Bitterness is almost easier to hide than it is to share.
I think bitterness oozes. There's just from my experience with witnessing myself as a generator, witnessing other generators with frustration, and then witnessing projectors with their bitterness, is that I think projectors feel like they are hiding it, but it penetrates, it oozes into your system, and all of a sudden you're like, what is this? It's like you can taste it. You can taste the bitterness from a projector. And with the frustration from a generator, it's just where we're constantly like bumping into like a desire that we have that has not been able to build at that timely manner that our mind wants it to build at. And so it's I wonder how you guys non-sacrals and like especially a reflector, because you're like literally like aside from the projector being inside of us, you're like you're sampling us in a way that I feel like the other types can't do. I don't know how to put that into the right words, but
Yeah,
I feel
I got
like
you.
frustration, it's bitterness can come and go, but frustration can last a very, very long time because it's that thing that we really want to like move has not been able to like be built yet. And so it's like until that thing, and it's always frustration, I've realized, for a generator. I'm curious to hear what your take is on this. Always happens right before the desire actually comes in to like fully respond to or fully generate. Because I like to say I generate, I don't manifest. I never resonated with that word at all. But when I say I generate, it like I feel like my engine turns on just by saying that.
That's refreshing. I love that. I get a lot of people who are like, I looked up my chart and I put the wrong birth time and I thought I was a manifester, but I'm just a generator. And I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah,
I mean, generators are the real like law of attraction masters. Manifestors,
true.
they can go out and get it. Um, but I think that happens a lot with the whole dance between signature and not self. And it's similar to the dance between like the higher self and the ego. right? There's a lot of people that are looking to kill their ego and transcend their ego. And I'm like, dude, your ego drives your car, you know, it writes your texts, it remembers all the link. It has so many useful things. Why would you want to kill your ego? Why not treat it like a training partner? And this is something I see in the West a lot. And I'd be really curious to eventually, maybe in a decade, have enough metrics to look at the not self-expressions of people in the East versus people in the West. Because in the West, there's so much more of this, how you say, like lobotomized mental trying to grasp at it. And it's not until like I surrender to the frustration or surrender to the bitterness that I actually give myself permission to feel whatever it is that I'm feeling, and to actually, how you say, kind of like transcend the expectation rather than transcending the ego. It's one that, again, I feel like in the East, it's a whole different psychosis on the other end of the spectrum in that way. And so, yeah, it's so funny because I feel that same way. That's how I met my partner. I was like, I'm done dating women. I'm not gonna date anyone. I'm fine with being alone. And then like a month later, the love of my life shows up at a festival.
That's what
She lives
happens
on the same
every
island.
single time. That is what I had to go through as well. It
Yeah.
was the year before I met my husband. I was like, I'm done dating. We're taking a year off. All
Yeah.
this thing. I meet him like a few months later, right actually before I got into this my awakening. I got hit by a car on a bike and I almost died. And that I met him just a few months before that. And he ended up being one of the only people that was there for me after that
Mhm.
experience.
Mhm.
And so it brought us together. And it was like, it's so interesting the way when you just like surrender to the entirety of everything that
Right.
like those mental thoughts that either you thought you needed, those dissipate, or those desires that you've been holding on to for a lifetime, they finally materialize.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I love about human design. It's like, why would you go search an entire continent for buried treasure when there's the possibility that this map will tell you where every point of surrender is going to be.
It is. It like I feel like as a third line, and I'd be curious, and also like a third, mostly third color. I I've and it's also with a tie in Kabbalah because I worked at the Kabbalah Center and I learned about the tree of life, which is the ladder to ascension. That's what it
Mhm.
is. And what we're actually trying to reach is the heart, the G center, and it's called Teferet in Hebrew. And
Mhm.
so we all start at the bottom sphere, which is called Malchut, and it's working, and that's the material world. That's where most people stay. Most people
Mhm.
will not leave Malchut. They will stay in survival. And that's the mental construct that our predecessors had, right? Where it was all
Mhm.
their authority was mental. And so we think that everything has to operate through the mind and through the material world, keeping us at the bottom, instead of realizing if we connect to our heart, that there is a ladder to get back there. And it's about a remembering. And it's a remembering that we are literally all just pieces of just fractals of one giant puzzle. And it's like, I learned all of this in Kabbalah. And then when I heard like Ra like reiterate that in his version, I was like, holy shitballs. My my mind just exploded. And I can't really talk about this kind of stuff with too many people because most people have even I heard Richard Rudd.
Mhm.
He talks about like Ra did not even understand the full concept of Kabbalah. Like it was just what the voice told him, and he
Mhm.
put the pieces together. But I can tell just from here listening to him on his lectures and classes that I've picked up that he never fully like he didn't dive into Kabbalah. Like I can tell,
Yeah.
because I lived and breathed that air for 3.5 years. I worked there, and then I took the classes, and it was all accidental, on purpose. Third line.
Accidentally on purpose. Exactly.
That's just my life, accidentally on purpose. And it
For
would
sure.
be it would be shortly after that I would bump into human design when I was actually after I had my manifestor, which is super. Can I tell you a quick story?
Yes,
And
please.
actually, a quick story for our audience that may or may not have heard the story before, but I'll be quick. When I was working at the Kabbalah Center, I had started there right after I got married. It was just about a year before my Saturn return. I actually found out that I was going into my Saturn return the day before I went into it.
Let's go.
By one of the teachers of the Kabbalah Center. I was like, could you have told me maybe just a little bit sooner? That would have been like just, as a first line, I look back, like that could have been as a first line, I'm just everything I need to be prepared. And
Hmm.
so when I was working there, I ended up getting pregnant with my manifestor. And I had a teacher, and this is how you can like really see how Kabbalah fits into human design. It is literally wild. But
Mm.
so Kabbalah speaks of they work with Kabbalistic astrology that's connected to actually the lunar cycle. Um, and so um every day, like there's a high energy day and a low energy day. They have a whole calendar for everything. And then there was one day that week that I was supposed to have and I had to have a C-section because he was breached.
Mm.
And he would not turn. He's ego being, okay, very stubborn.
Mm.
And so a teacher came to me and said, if you're going to have a C-section, this is the day you have him because this is the highest energy day of this week and one of the highest energy days of the year. And it actually connected to prosperity and abundance. And of course, when I went to look up his chart after having him like a year later, because I didn't find human design until after,
Hmm.
I found out that he was a 1/4 ego manifester and he only had one line, or one channel, excuse me, and it was the money line.
Yeah,
That's all
45.1.
that's all he has. And he's a cross of tension.
Uh-huh.
And I'm trying to remember. Let me double check. I forget where the 55 is for him. Um, where is his chart? But it might be his son. Both I accidentally on purpose also had two cross of tensions for fun. My other son is also cross of tension. And they're just kind of like ping pong balls back and forth between the two of them.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
but oh, excuse me, I meant the 39. The 39
Are they
is
in martial
much
arts?
fun. It kind of looks like martial arts between the two of them when they fight. My youngest is a 1/3 sacral generator like me. He's like my mini me. And
Mhm.
then my ego manifestor, which he's just a manifestor and a bunch of generators. My husband's a 6/2 sacral generator. My mom's a manifesting generator. My brother's a generator. My husband's families are all generators. So,
Mm.
and I saw the very distinct difference when I had him. Like when he was born, I was like, I was like, you are not like
Like,
other
did you really come
people.
out of me?
I know. And so in Kabbalah and also in because it's also connected to Judaism,
Mhm.
um it's called mikveh. I don't know if you've ever heard of mikveh.
Mhm.
It's basically Kabbalistically they explain it, it's a dunking that you do. It's a spiritual dunking, but it's basically going back into like the maternal womb every time you dunk. And
Mm.
so and they tell you to do that every day when you're pregnant and to keep the body clear.
Yeah.
And so my manifestor, his motivation is innocence. And I think that there is something to that. He is one of the most purest beings I've ever encountered.
Mm.
And I'm hoping through giving him this information. I told him when he was 5 years old that he was a manifestor, and we sat there and cried together when I told him the way he is, and I just held him, and he's never been the same ever since, but like in the best way
Huh.
because he knew he was different.
I'd be very curious to know word for word exactly what you said to them, because I too have a manifestor child,
Mm,
and I dream of I have daydreams and of those kinds of conversations with her where I get to kind of affirm like, hey, everybody else is gonna do stuff in a
yep.
seemingly alien way to you.
Yeah.
But that doesn't, you have to change yourself.
Yeah.
Uh, that's
I
beautiful. Well,
I
it's very
basically
lucky
told
to have a
him,
mother like you.
thank you. I
Or he's
basically
very
told
lucky
him
to
in
have
a,
you as a mother,
oh,
I
thank
should say.
you.
Yeah.
I feel like if I ever think back, when I explained this to him, I told him very simply that it's okay to be different,
Mm,
and that you probably feel very different than everybody else. And he like you I could see the switch happen in his eyes, and it
mhm,
was like this acceptance, which is also innocence, six color.
mm,
And I feel like that changed him for the better,
mhm,
because he then accepted I am very, like, he knew, and that he was very different than other people. Manifestors, they're naturally resistant to literally
mhm.
life, just existing. They're resistant.
Yeah.
And they really raised themselves. I feel like Ra was very correct about that. There's some things that I'm like, I don't know. I think there's some maybe wiggle room with some of the ways I hear him talk about generators. I'm like, um, yes and
Like,
no.
chill, bro, chill.
Yeah, I'm like, yes and no, yes and no. But he knew himself, and
Mhm,
he knew the way the manifestor actually is here to operate, whether the voice told him or not. And it's so true. You do not need to raise a manifestor. I do not raise him. I give him guidelines. Um, Ra also said that it's the manifestor asks to do something when they're younger more than informing is
mhm.
and I think that's to exercise that informing muscle by figuring out boundaries,
Yeah.
is what I've realized. And I feel like the manifestor also really appreciates boundaries because they don't have any. That's
Yeah.
a manifestor loves. I would love to hear a manifestors come for me with this, and like also tell me your thoughts as well. But they love to be put in their place. Love it.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of our podcast on the Human Design and Astro Club. We hope you have found the information insightful and useful. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review and sharing it with your friends and family. We love to hear from our listeners, so feel free to reach out to us with any feedback, questions, or suggestions for future episodes. Until next time, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.